Perhaps it is this personal quality, this appeal to the human heart, which makes Beethoven's music loved and enjoyed today as it was in his time. Beethoven was the first to make his music available to all people. This was an important contribution. It reflected the growth of democratic ideas that came out of the times in which he lived. He was born in 1770 in the city of Bonn, Germany. Today, this is the Church of the Minor Friars, where Beethoven, as a boy, played the organ. As a boy, he must have often gazed at the Rhine, which flows past the city of Bonn. Along the Rhine, too, the castles of German nobles looked down on a way of life which had not changed for centuries. It was a time when kings and princes still ruled Europe. It was the late 18th century. Near the town of Bonn, the boy Beethoven often saw the great estates and palaces of the nobility. Perhaps he wondered about the great difference between such a princely palace and the little cottage where he was born. The little upper room where Beethoven was born is part of the plain whitewashed garret. And yet the family owned a piano. Beethoven's father, a court singer, taught the boy to play. At 10, he was taking lessons on the violin. In later years, he was to write many compositions for violin and piano, including his sonatas. The one we are hearing is the Violin Sonata No. 2, one of his earliest. As a young man, he left Bonn to seek a better living in Vienna. There, he spent the rest of his life. Vienna was the home of great composers. Haydn, master of classic music, and Mozart, the great. Like Mozart's music, Beethoven's early works reflect the classic tradition of balance and design, music that is often compared to the form and balance of classic architecture. Like Mozart, too, Beethoven wrote much of his music for wealthy patrons. In the palace of his patron and friend, Prince Lobkowitz, Beethoven often performed. The music he played was chamber music, written for the drawing room. In Beethoven's time, this might have been a setting for a performance of the Archduke Trio, one of his chamber works. But Beethoven's music reflects far more than the classic tradition of the 18th century. For this century was also a time of change. The spirit of the French Revolution had surged across Europe. The common people were fighting for democracy. They were struggling for new ideals of freedom and brotherhood. These ideals influenced Beethoven. His third symphony, the Eroica, or Heroic Symphony, reflects the drama of the revolutionary period. Beethoven dedicated this symphony to the great French hero, Napoleon Bonaparte, who rose to power out of the revolution. Beethoven probably thought that Napoleon would preserve the liberties of the French people. When Napoleon became dictator instead, Beethoven denounced him. People believe that the real hero of the Eroica is Beethoven himself. kind of man created such dramatic music? He was a man of many moods. The letters he wrote to princes and commoners were sometimes strange mixtures of violence and tenderness. There are many stories told of his temper. He was a man who might, in an outburst of fury, hurl something at a servant. He was a man who, growing totally deaf at the height of his career, once confessed in despair, "I hear nothing, nothing." And yet, although he was deaf, there poured from his mind a torrent of music. Like most composers of this period, he was among the first to play his works for the common people. He also performed his own compositions for the nobility. These included the princes of Imperial Vienna. Here was music that caught the glory of the Austrian Empire. Here was music that reflected the struggles of people under the occupation troops of Napoleon. Here was music that portrayed the Vision of freedom was Goethe, the German poet whom Beethoven knew. For Egmont, a historical play by Goethe, Beethoven wrote incidental music. The Egmont Overture reflects the heroic story of a champion of freedom. His name was Count Egmont. As a leader of the Dutch people, Egmont gave his life in their historic struggle for freedom from Spain. This was the kind of theme that appealed to Beethoven and his love of liberty. The music for Egmont is powerful, dramatic, heroic. This is music that is quite different from the formal classic music of earlier times. Beethoven's personality is a part of this romantic music. "You will ask me," he once said, "where I get my ideas. That I cannot tell you with certainty. They come unsummoned. I could seize them with my hands in the open air, in the woods while walking, in the silence of the night, in the early morning." And these ideas that Beethoven seized, he set down in notes that combined the classic music of form and tradition and the romantic music of emotion and feeling. Here in a suburb of Vienna, Beethoven probably found inspiration for one of his greatest works, the Pastoral Symphony. Along this path, still called Beethoven's path, he walked many times, perhaps gathering those ideas that he said seemed to come unsummoned. "No mortal can love the country as I do," he once said. That love he poured into the music of his Pastoral Symphony. During his lifetime, Beethoven wrote 9 symphonies. In Vienna, he continued to compose to the end of his life. And always he was the unconquerable genius, That genius gave to all people a world of music that they had never known. It is music which blended the traditions of classicism and the moving spirit of romanticism. "I do not fear for my works," Beethoven said, "and whoever shall understand them, he shall be free from all the misery that burdens mankind." This is the music of Beethoven. Powerful, inspiring, majestic. Music for all people, for all time.